Hey everybody, welcome back live at Drew's house, Joppa Afternoon Drive. Hope you're doing well out there. It is springtime in Newburyport. It's warming up out there. I promise it's warming up. We're going to have warm days here before we know it. And with spring comes the Newburyport Literary Festival. It is now it's the 19th year here. It's going to be kicking off April 26th to April 28th. It's always a fun weekend here in Newburyport. We'll get into a lot of this as we go. But I'm joined today. Our guest is Dyke Hendrickson, who is being honored this yeyear. Dyke, congratulations.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
It is an honor. I've been with it for 19 years.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to be a part on the other side, to be an honoree.
And I've had your wife, Vicky, on here.
Yeah, she's been on. She's the founder of it, again, 19 years ago. And so
I think I remember talking to her maybe when we were just coming out of like the COVID period, because you guys had to switch everything up for COVID. I know it was hard to bring people together, and I remember talking to Vicky about that. That was a pain in the neck in a lot of ways, but we found ways to be resourceful.
Yeah, I mean, you probably had challenges, and they certainly did too, because they couldn't have people.
I was doing shows from my kitchen at one point.
And it would have worked, I'm sure. Your show is very entertaining.
No doubt. Well, your book, this is your most recent book, is that?
That's correct.
All right, Reclaiming the Merrimack here, which I know a lot of people locally will be very interested in around here. What prompted you to write this one?
Well, I've written a number of books. I'm a career journalist. I was with the Daily News for about 5 years here in town, from 2012 to 2017. And one of the things I would do is, in 2014, I think I did a long series on the anniversary of the community, about 250 years. And so I saw a lot of information about the Merrimack River, what role it played over the years. So I got very interested in it, and I wrote a book called Nautical Newburyport, which is actually about the harbor and the shipbuilding and the war making that we were involved in. And then I wrote a book called Plum Island, A Vulnerable Gem. So I did the river, and then I did Plum Island, and so I was on the river theme, and the possibility to do Reclaiming the Merrimack came along, and so I did that.
Yeah. I'm just thinking, as you said that, I just remember thinking a few months ago that flooding on Plum Island was just horrendous. It washed out so much of the whole area, the main strip.
It did. I mean, it is a barrier island, and people, are learning that there are going to be floods, more floods in the future, more floods of the road, actually. Yeah. And so that's something, it's unfortunate, but we'll have to get used to. Yeah,
the Merrimack River itself, too. Like when I'm a Danvers boy, and, I started doing shows here, and, you started start to become a part of the city, and you start learning about the Merrimack and how, I guess, is unforgiving a good word for that river, too? I mean, it's
unforgiving, and it's 117 miles long. Yeah. And until about 1820, it was a very pristine river. And of course, then, the mills came along in Lowell and Lawrence. They built mills along the river, and they started putting effluent and garbage into the river. So probably since about 1820, it's been still beautiful, particularly from, a distance, but it has pollution in it, and things are improving, but it still does have a lot of effluent in the river.
Yeah, there's a lot of, I know every year there's work to always improve it. So like you said, hopefully it's getting nice. But yeah, it's a fascinating history. I imagine you're going to be showing up the Literary Festival talking about this book here. You're bringing this thing out. And
Yes, I'm bringing the book. And I'll be talking about some of the cleanup efforts. I mean, obviously, as you indicated, Drew, they're trying to do more each year. They're trying to clean up the sewage treatment plants, say in Lowell and Lawrence. But even Newburyport and Amesbury, which do not put their sewage in there, we have many pipes that go from the street or go from a parking lot. And, they collect the rainwater, which all goes into the river. So you have that oil, the salt, probably at least 60 different pipes, even in Newburyport alone, go into the Merrimack.
Is that right? Wow. Yeah, you think about all that, what it must collect. Wow, 2,000 people are going to be at this thing. That's exciting.
It is. And
2,000 new faces to come and get their hands on your book.
I think, people go to different events, and that's one of the strengths of the festival. So if you like nonfiction, you might come to one of my presentations.
Sure.
If you like fiction, there would be that. If you like poetry, there would be that. And there are people, from the Boston area, and most are from the North Shore, but still are people from all different areas who talk about what they've been doing.
And I'd imagine, I know this thing has dozens and dozens of authors that show up here. And I would imagine that authors like talking to other authors?
I think to some degree. I mean, you're interested in what they're doing.
Yeah.
One of the favorite authors that I enjoyed over the years was Senator George Mitchell.
Oh, yeah.
Nonfiction, of course, and he was asked, he had a book out that year, and he came to the festival, and, he was well known as a senator. He was retired at the time, but he really knew a lot about the histories, say from 1980 to 2000, in the U.S. Senate. So George Mitchell, as I think of it, was one of the most interesting speakers that they had.
And you had the newspaper background. Are you a big politics guy?
I was. And back in the day, I knew George Mitchell. We lived in Waterville, Maine for a while. He was from Waterville, Maine. And our daughter, Leslie Hendrickson, was actually a page in his office.
Oh, wow.
So we knew him. We took Leslie down, and we had known George Mitchell because Waterville's a small town, just like Newburyport. So it's always been fun to follow his career, and he was very helpful in helping Leslie, our daughter, to learn more about Washington.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a great story. As a guy who's in news radio, I've been hearing news radios dying for the last 15, 20 years, and I've been hearing that about newspapers too. Can you give me your thoughts? You have all sorts of experience in the journalistic world. What are your thoughts on newspapers these days?
Well, I think it's as you said, we've been hearing about the demise of radio for a long time. It hasn't happened. It has improved in some ways. It's gotten more creative in some ways. I think people also realize, how valuable radio is. And it's similar to local newspapers. For instance, on something like high school or kids' sports. It's hard to do that if you're in any other field than newspapers. And even now, was it back in my day, if your picture, is in the paper for shooting a basket or hitting a tennis ball, you'll probably cut it out, and it's been exciting.
Yeah.
So I think that'll continue. To be, if it stays local. Now, if the local Daily News thought they could do world events,
yes,
they probably wouldn't do so well. But staying local, I think there's a lot of followers.
Well, there's no other place that does that dives into local community stories like that, and other than the newspaper.
Right.
Unless you have a radio station in your town, which not every place has, I guess they could do that too. But the newspaper is the fabric of that in so many ways.
It is, and it also can bring out things that wouldn't be normally brought out, like statistics or photos, or maybe they'll have the cheerleading squad, which in fact this local paper does. Yeah. The captains of the cheerleaders from all local Amesbury or Newburyport or whatever, their pictures are there, and so it gives them some, attention to a job that's a lot of fun, but a lot of work for the cheerleaders. And so there are many ways that the papers can still be useful.
Yeah, there's not so much glossing over stories. They tend to have time to dive in and actually give it the time of day, which I always thought is nice about the newspaper. I know, like I like having a hard copy paper in my hand too. I still like that. I know I'm probably not the majority these days. Most kids, I would imagine, would prefer to use their phone and go, but I do still like the hard copy. You still use a hard copy?
Yeah, I still get the newspaper, and if there's something going on, like a flood at Plum Island, for instance, the first thing I'll do is go out and get the paper and see if they had any photos. Now, as you say, if the photo is in the newspaper, it's probably going to be online as well. Yeah. But that's my instinct to see, blown up to 4 columns and finding out how Plum Island is doing.
What were your years over at the paper?
2012 to 2017. Okay. I had been with the Boston Herald. I'd been with the Portland Press Herald up the road, and I was with the New Orleans Times-Picayune. We lived in New Orleans for a while. So it was a big switch to go from New Orleans, to Newburyport. And but it was both look very interesting. What's
the general? How does the day begin in a newspaper newsroom? Is it you in dark and early? And
it's not so early. because it's you get in maybe 10 to 12. You have a meeting in the morning, and you talk back and forth what happened the previous day. You might look at the AP wire. You might have driven around that morning if there'd been a storm or if there'd been something going on, and you just decide which stories have to go the next day. You also try to plan for the end of the week and for the Monday paper. And so if there's a feature story, which doesn't have to be done that day, say, you were honoring the 100th birthday of, a local citizen, which is sometimes, you can do that early. You can have that backed up. So sometimes you're doing news. If there's a flood at Plum Island, sometimes you're doing a feature story.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, it's not so, and there is that aspect of always looking ahead too. You're always going to do that in news and find the new angle of how to advance things and all that. It's fascinating. I've always liked the whole newspaper discussion just because it's still part of. I'm 37, but newspapers were part of my childhood still. My dad never came home without a newspaper. It was always there. So,
I think another element, Drew, is the letters to the editor, which is just about as old as newspapers themselves.
Yeah.
It's still a good vehicle. To get an opinion out, like, how much you spend on the new school building or, different elements that come up. And, sometimes they're barbed letters, or sometimes, like, I take offense at, the writer who put that in last week. And so you still have a vibrant discourse in the letters to the editor.
Yeah. And we still, I don't know if you saw this with the women's basketball last night. Did you see that writer who got in trouble out on the West Coast? He used some derogatory terms about LSU, saying it was good versus evil, and a few other terms that got him in trouble. He had to issue an apology overnight.
Well, I did see that. I mean, not judging because I don't know the whole thing. He was very loose with his language. He was very
I think a veteran, too.
Disrespectful. And so I'm glad they called him out on it, and I'm glad, he had to... Because, that was a national story. I read it here, you read it here, so it went all over the place. And women's sports, as you know, Drew, have come a long way. They're on national TV now, so it was just inappropriate. Yeah,
it was a bad moment for when they're getting, you're right, the highest ratings I think they've ever had for the basketball tournament right now. So, and good for them. I hope they keep rolling along. Does the newspaper writing, what's the biggest difference between that and writing a book? Is it liberating writing a book and having the time and going at it at your own pace, or what?
Well, that's a good question, because one thing about writing books, again, it's nonfiction, is that I'm used to a deadline. So I'm used to writing. I've talked to poets and writers of fiction, and it's hard for them to sit down. But if you've come through the newspapers, I got to sit down now. I'm going to write for 2 hours. If it's not perfect, I'll try to improve it. So that is part of it. The other element of my books is I interview people. I have a lot of interviews with people. Like my next book is on lobsters, for instance.
Oh, wow.
For the love of lobsters, it's called for the moment. And so what I'm going to do is interview lobstermen. I'm going to go out on the boat. I'm going to interview the wholesaler. He'll bring in maybe 5,000 lobsters in a given day. He'll find places to sell them. So I will interview them. I'll be on the scene. So that makes it interesting. And then I can write up, what I saw and what actually happened. Because we all know about lobsters, but maybe not so much on the day of the lobster, what happens at a given day.
That's the reporter in you there doing all that stuff, right?
I like to do that, and a lot of people like to talk about the work, and lobsters, has been popular for a very long time, and so I think that'll be an interesting topic.
Well, lobsters are fascinating because they're only, a delicacy because we make them one, right? I mean, they're the bottom of the ocean, and didn't back in they used to feed them to prisoners and all that stuff?
They did. I mean, this is 2 centuries ago before it was quite realized, and they used them for prisoners for fertilizer as well, Drew, I must say. So that's not a high calling. But they realized, that they were nourishing, and so they became quite a delicacy. Yeah. And here on the coast, we're close to Maine. We have our own lobsters, but most lobstering is still done in Maine.
Yeah.
And they catch about 3 million lobsters. There are 3 million traps out each year. So, the lobster has a tough day of it to have a good day, but there's a lot of traps out there.
There are. Do you, whenever you have those lobster conversations, do you get into the regulations a lot with these people? Because it seems like that's been a touchy subject over the last decade.
Regulations are important. And they're used to them. Lobstering is highly regulated, really. As you say, how large they are, where you can get them, when you can sell them in some cases. So lobstermen are quite used to that. I just went recently to the Massachusetts Lobstermen's Association annual meeting, and they talked about some of the things that you're talking about. But, they also had the state officials there, the environmental officials. And there's a back and forth, As you said, they're saying, please don't raise, the size of them again, and make it just enable us to catch and keep as many lobsters as possible is what they're trying to say.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's two sides to all those coins, obviously, but yes, I know it's been a battle in recent years. When you go to the literary festival, I imagine, to paint the picture here, do you literally sit down with a book here and people can come up to you and talk to you and ask questions, and is that all part of this?
Yes, as what's happening is on Friday night we're having 3 local historians, Drew Woodworth and Bethany Groff, and the 3 of us will be at the firehouse, and we'll talk a little about our work, and people ask us questions. And then the next day I have a session in one of the venues, and where I'm going to read from my book for about 10 minutes. I'm showing some slides. I have 40 slides, and then people will ask me questions. And I like the slides. Most people don't have them, but nonfiction being what it is, I show the river in different parts of it, way up in New Hampshire, then we come down through Lowell and Lawrence, and here we are, in Newburyport. So we'll have a little of both, some speaking and some slides.
How do you choose what passages to read?
Well, I try to pick one of the most interesting people in a given book. And so, if I interviewed them, I know, they may have started lobstering, say, when they were 10 years old, and there are a lot of women in lobstering as well. So I'll probably talk about a section that I'm looking at about a lobster woman, how she got into it, and then I'll show some slides that shows, first of all, the Merrimack River, and then also a little about lobstering.
Okay. Wow. So that's the Friday night you're doing that, and then
that Friday night is just at the firehouse, and we're not making presentations. We're just talking briefly, and then Saturday afternoon I'm going to have I think it's going to be in the firehouse as well, and showing slides. And a lot of people haven't been upriver, for instance, so they'll see slides of the river from New Hampshire all the way down.
Yeah, I remember having a just as we talk about the river too. I remember one of the Coast Guard guys came in here one day, and he was talking. I think it was just after a tragedy had happened, and he was just saying, I can't emphasize enough. We're not out there to be pains, but we want you all to have life jackets, and we want you all, if you're hanging out around the river, just respect it, because these currents that pick up along the Merrimack they can be rough, and whether you're a kid or a grown adult, a strong swimmer or a weak swimmer, it could catch you off guard, and just be aware. And that's probably a good message to say every time of year around now.
It is, and spring is coming, summer's not far behind, and if you think about the river, you have a strong tide possibly coming in from the ocean. You have a strong current from the river going the other way. So there's a big churn at the base of the river, which is what you're talking about. And almost every boater I've ever spoken to, if they're from here or not, they talk about the Merrimack here is considered one of the toughest rivers on the whole East Coast. Again, because you have a tide, you have the river. And another thing about the river that makes it unique is it's one of the few, Newburyport's one of the few port towns that has a river all the way up, 117 miles. And so Portsmouth or Portland, they're big ports, but they don't have rivers that go up so far. And in the old days, Newburyport became a shipbuilding community in part because they could send some logs down on the river, which those other communities could not.
Interesting. Yeah, that's fascinating. And speaking of ships, you did a lot of writing about ships too, didn't you?
I did. I did a lot about ships, and one of the things that amazes me, even now we're out of winter, but they would sail from Newburyport or Portland or whatever in February or March. They'd have perhaps granite, perhaps lumber, perhaps food, but it's cold in February. Not just cold, but the stays and the sails, they freeze up. I mean, I thought to myself, this is a very beyond cumbersome. This is difficult to be sailing a full laden ship in March or February. It just struck me as a tough job.
No, I would imagine it is. Yeah, I don't want to be on a boat in February out there, man.
I know. Like, how do you fall asleep at night? Because some of the, underneath, and not every room is heated. There's anyway.
Yeah.
You see the challenge.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I know some people that do the whether it be oil rigs or whatever rigs out there, and a lot of those jobs you go out for a month and you come back home for a month, and schedules aren't always easy on the ocean either, right?
No.
On the river.
But one of the things that you just mentioned is interesting. The people I met, the lobstermen in Maine and Massachusetts, are concerned about offshore wind power.
Yeah.
In the next 5 to 10 years, there's going to be a lot of building of windmills and wind structures. And that's going to be disconcerting on a day-to-day basis for lobstermen or fishermen. But it's also going to be difficult for the ports. You're going to have all those barges. You're going to have construction. So our part of New England, even from Newburyport up through Maine, is going to have a different look in coming years because of wind power.
Yeah, and although. Which I've been waiting for this because we've been hearing about it for so long, and I mean, I see the wind turbines that are out in Newburyport right now, and they haven't exactly exploded all throughout the place, but it seems to be the direction that at least the country and the world is going in. What's your take on it all? Because I know a lot of people just don't change. I'm old school. The world is fine. It's maybe there's climate deniers.
Well, I think one of the elements is most of the wind power is going to be at least 3 miles out. So it won't be like, there's one 400 yards off of Plum Island. That will not be the case. It'll be 3 to 12 miles out. Now, if they can stick to that, on a clear day, you might be able to see something. But hopefully they'll, stay distant, and maybe we'll all get used to them.
What about, I have a bit of an affinity towards Plum Island because I kind of jumped onto it later in life, and there was a great music scene down there, and they had fun festivals. But you look at Plum Island and you look at those houses that are there, and you can see I can tell by not going there for a few months, coming back after a winter, and you can see what the waves have done to the beach, and you can see the beach disappearing slowly, and it is scary. Yeah.
It is scary, and each winter is different. Two winters ago, I think, or let's say back in 2015, which is longer than that, several structures actually, fell off of the precipice and onto the beach, and then they became a little stronger on what kind of permit you would give. So the erosion is continuing. If you have a house there, it's a beautiful view, but depending on where you are, you're going to be vulnerable in future years. And everyone kind of agrees. I mean, they wanted to put up, stone walls or brick walls there on the Newburyport side, but a lot of state and federal officials, said no. I mean, let's leave it natural. You have a dune, you have sand, but we don't want to put all cement and all stone walls in Newburyport. And I kind of agree with that. It's a beautiful beach, as you know, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, honestly, people that live there say the same thing. We'll see what happens. There's an element of riding this out a little bit too, and take precautions. But yeah, it's fascinating to see the changing landscapes. You look at like the exact same photos from 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and parts of the whole beach took different shapes, and it's wild to see. But anyway, Dyke Hendrickson joining us here. We got the Newburyport Literary Festival. It begins on April 26th, which is the Friday. And the festival is free too. We haven't mentioned
that. The festival's free. There's one dinner Friday night, which is a buffet. If you, obviously not, it's compulsory, but if you feel like eating at the Grog that night, it's a short meal, but a lot of people, a lot of readers come,
Yeah.
a lot of writers come. It's a change of pace, and I think it'll be fun.
Just a good place to talk about. It's a great place if you're an author to talk about your book, but also, I know a lot of readers like to come and share and say, I just read this, and you should check this out, and it's just a good place to share ideas, right?
Yeah, that's one of the things, talking about books. You don't have to be an author, but if you sit down, people might say, what are you reading? Everyone there reads. And so that's always a good icebreaker. And, it might be fiction, it might be poetry. It's and people come from throughout the North Shore and New Hampshire and southern Maine. And so it really gets a lot of people in for one of the first spring weekends that we have.
No doubt. So 2,000 people is what we're expecting here. Again, Friday night is kind of the kickoff. Do you know what time people are going to be there for that?
It starts at 6 o'clock, so people can come in at like 5:30 or so, sit down. There's about an hour, and it's early enough so people can still go out for dinner and not, at any of the restaurants.
And you're kind of one of the big, was it big three that are being honored? Is that right?
Well, I don't know if big can be. Maybe veterans, three veterans.
Whatever you prefer.
Right. But it'll be fun, and Newburyport, as you know, Drew, has a terrific history in many ways on the ocean, on High Street. The churches are known nationally.
Oh, yeah.
And the architecture is known nationally. So this is an incredible spot for history and a festival such as this.
I love all these little festivals they do, because not only do you get the people that come and they come to see and, they do their thing, what they maybe would expect from a literary festival, but then they end up walking around here, and a lot of them stay here for the weekend, and, they have lunch here, and it's a beautiful little walking city. I really enjoy this. And, maybe they'll find somebody playing guitar they like in a bar, it's just a fun thing.
And as you say, every venue for the literary festival can be reached by walking.
Yeah.
So you may see something at the South Church, and then the next thing you go to might be at City Hall. But it's a matter of walking. You don't have to move your car. You don't have to take a bus or Uber, if we have that here.
Yeah. So, you can find them. Although the last time I did look, it took me a while. I did get one though. What's as far as this is the 19th annual here. As far as this particular festival goes, what are you most looking forward to this time around?
I think, well, for me, I like the history end of it. Glee Woodworth talks a lot about her work about the streets. She started with cemeteries. She's very nationally known as a cemetery expert. But she talks about streets, the history of State Street, the history of Pleasant Street. Mm-hmm. And Bethany will talk about, similar elements, and she talks a lot about the rural life of Newburyport and West Newbury, whatever, in past years. So both of them, talk about the politics and the government to some degree, but also other things like architecture, farms, produce, the animals that used to be here. So you can learn quite a bit.
No doubt. It is definitely a learning experience. Dyke Hendrickson, we should also give a shout out to Vicki, because I know these things are not easy to put together.
No, this is the 19th year, and you always have to get your line up, and so you have a poet for 3 o'clock Saturday, and the poet calls, say, 3 weeks ahead and said, I can't make it or something. So,
right.
It's a moving target.
Yeah.
But anyway, Drew, thank you very much for having me. Thank you for taking an interest in the festival. And I'm looking forward to it in a few weeks.
We always love talking about it. We know it is a big hit here in Newburyport. It is the Newburyport Literary Festival. Again, April 26th, it kicks off. Go get your tickets. It's free. It's a beautiful thing.
It is free.
And so 2,000 people expected to come through here and check it all out. And you should go check it out, too. It is a great take and always a staple here of Newburyport this time of year. Always a sign of spring for me, too, I think.
It is.
Yeah.
And it's usually, we've had sunny days recently, and even if, you have to wear a small jacket or something, it's pleasant.
No doubt about it. It's good to be outside when all those COVID days kept us in.
That's right.
That's what I say. Anyway, Dyke Hendrickson, thank you, sir. It was a pleasure talking about your book.
Thank you very much.
Show that book again one more time for the camera, just so people want to go pick it up. Reclaiming the Merrimack. We talked a lot about the river and the oceans and all that stuff today, so I hope you enjoyed that. Covered a lot of ground. Thank you to Maeve Power directing the show, Sarah Hayden, the boss, Ryan Rothberg, Maya Gassman, our small but mighty team here in Newburyport. Thank you. We love you guys very much. This has been Live at Drew's House. Thank you, Dyke. We'll see you next time, everybody.